uninitiated, these are what's known as compilers. That's not their true name, though. As a species, they're known as the Sphit. Anyone who's played the original Marathon knows what they are. You find them in almost every level of the original Marathon games, and you even go to their homeworld of Lh'owon in the sequel, Marathon Durandal. You've doubtless seen them many times in the run-up to our incursions on Tau Ceti Pfhor, but despite this, they've remained consistently enigmatic, a mystery within sight but beyond our grasp. Now, as we inch closer and closer to ascending into the Marathon itself, it seems like an appropriate time to be armed with knowledge. Inevitably, there are still many unknowns on the nature of the Sphit aboard the Marathon itself. Speculation leads to misconception and pitfalls. At this moment in time, what is required is absolute truth. And the reality is that even if we don't know the role of the Sphit aboard the Marathon, we still know a lot about the Sphit. Speculation or not, if you're going to understand what you're likely to face aboard the Marathon, you should know who the Sphit are, and what really happened to them. The Sphit were first encountered by humanity in the initial attack on the UESC Marathon. They were a core component of the Pfhor assault force, an alien empire that had enslaved their entire species. But their history as a people predates this attack by a significant span of time. The oldest histories of the Sphit lead us to a potential place of origin, their desert homeworld of Lh'owon. Thanks to the planet-side explorations of Mjolnir Recon No. 54, we learned that they were uplifted by the Yaro. Some amongst the Sphit questioned whether they were originally related to a species of native life on their home planet, called the Pfhor. In fact, the Pfhor and Sphit supposedly share common ancestry, lending credence to this notion. Aside from their appearance and level of technological sophistication, there is one other thing that sets the Sphit apart from the Pfhor. The Pfhor are purely biological creatures. The Sphit are not. In the process of their uplifting, the Sphit were changed by the Yaro, who implanted them with advanced cybernetics and augmentations. It is assumed that this was done so that the Yaro could make use of them to terraform the world of Lh'owon. To us, such cybernetic augmentation across the entirety of a species and the whole of their genetic catalogue makes the Sphit an oddity, but from the Sphit's perspective, this was all they had ever known. They even found it odd when they discovered sentience in purely biological forms of life, believing such a thing to be impossible. Such was the impact of the godlike power of the Yaro on the Sphit, that their perspective on personhood itself was completely altered. And so it was that their children's children's children would all be cybernetic in nature, half machine, half biological. The relationship between the Yaro and the Sphit is still relatively unexplored, though. Yes, they certainly worked together, but we don't know if the Yaro saw the Sphit as tools, children, or even as slaves. What we do know is that the Yaro made use of the Sphit to terraform Lh'owon from a desert world into a world of oceans, swamps, and forests. But the Sphit creation myth remembers these events a little differently, and a lot more allegorically. It states that the Sphit came to Lh'owon alongside the mythical figures of Yaro and Pfhor, who made their own way to Lh'owon, fleeing all working Kakinter. Supposedly, Yaro and Pfhor made the paradise of Lh'owon to live upon, and even made sisters for Lh'owon. This is understood to mean that they made moons to orbit the planet. Such was the power of these figures. Perhaps then, there was a time of peace. After all, there must have been. The world was terraformed, and such a process must take time, even for the Yaro. But eventually, as it always does, as it always will, chaos found them all. The working Carpenter arrived on Lh'owon, bringing with it the same chaos that it was renowned for. And in that crawling, creeping chaos, Pfhor was killed. This enraged Yaro, who lamented the loss of the one to whom he was paired, and in his rage, he flung the working Carpenter into the sun that Lh'owon orbited. But this was not the end of that great creature. The working Carpenter did not die, though it was burned by the surface of the sun. Within the burning plasma behind the bars of intense gravity, the working Carpenter survived. It fell into a deep slumber, waiting to be awakened should a new chaos wrench it from its gravitic prison. The Pfhor legends then tell of how Yaro became an angry master. He bled blood and shed tears as he grieved for the loss of Pfhor. Resolved in the moment of his defeat, he broke the Pfhor into 11 clans on Lh'owon and scattered them across its surface. And then he would leave them, saying only, "I, Yaro, who was your master, have failed to preserve you. Take your royalty to guide you, and live upon the paradise that you built for me." This royalty that Yaro is referring to here is likely to be the Pfhor royalty minds, the guiding consciousnesses of the Pfhor. And so, with those words, according to legend, the Pfhor lived upon Lh'owon, and Yaro left them to their fate. This can be interpreted as the Yaro perhaps moving on to greener pastures, or fleeing again from the working Carpenter. But they did not choose to bring the Pfhor with them if they did. And thus, this people fell into ruin. After the disappearance of the Yaro, the Pfhor clans would become disunited in the process of war and conflict. They were a people born from the necessity of a god's desires, no necessity at all perhaps, but regardless, that god had now abandoned them. Just as we all do as we jump from adolescence to adulthood, they must have raged within their beings to discern their purpose. We do not know all the details of what must have happened, but we do know that the Pfhor could not be united. And so, seeing this great disunity, the 11th clan of the Pfhor, known as the Pfhor, would abandon the surface of Lh'owon to live upon its third moon of Calia. In this way, they escaped the wars that had erupted between their brothers and sisters. Pfhor legends tell of the 11th clan orbiting Lh'owon for 1,000 cycles. They were forgotten amongst the wars of the other Pfhor who did battle amongst themselves. As conflicts between the clans escalated, they eventually led to the Marsh Wars, a time when the clans of the Pfhor and Pfhor fought one another. Such was the fury of their conflict that the waters of Lh'owon were scorched and blackened with ash. It was not long after these events that the moon of Calia vanished, along with the Pfhor. The legends of the Pfhor tell of how Yaro had sent the moon out amongst the stars, and of how the moon of Calia herself refused to see the carnage wrought upon her celestial sibling. Of course, if you see the constant here, Yaro and Yaro have a similarity to them. These legends can probably be interpreted as the result of Yaro technology that was powerful enough to fold space and move entire planetoids and moons. It is likely then that the Pfhor used this technology to separate themselves from their brethren until the warring factions could find an accord amongst themselves. Regardless of whether you believe the legends of Yaro or the more logical explanations of the story, what happened next is unchanged. Having lost the gravitic pull of one of its moons, the tides of Lh'owon's seas must have been irrevocably changed. And so the waters receded, and the red sands of the dead spread across the face of Lh'owon. So it was that Yaro and Pfhor's paradise turned into a desert once more. The Sphit promised that they would return, but only once all of the Sphit were united once more. They also left behind something else that the clans might be able to make use of. An ancient intelligence that seemingly was gifted to them by the Yaro. It called itself Pfhor, and could perhaps be used to save the clans and return the Sphit should the need arise. Make no mistake, the clans of Sphit would unite one day, but not before they had endured yet more suffering at the hands of another. Their world came under attack by an alien empire known as the Pfhor. These tyrannical slavers had brought their fleets and armies, but they also brought the might of superior technology with an uncomfortably familiar origin. Most of the weapons and devices of the Pfhor have some origin in Yaro technology, typically that which has been scavenged, reverse engineered, or even bootstrapped into a working fashion. As a result, their conquest of the Sphit was all but assured. The 10 remaining clans of the Sphit on Lh'owon would try desperately to fight back, but what little of Lh'owon was left to them would burn in the fires of the Pfhor's conquests. At a place known as the Citadel of Antiquity, the Sphit would make their final stand. But still, there was nothing that could be done to defeat the 4 aggressors. And so, the Sphit fell into the clutches of their new overlords. They were broken and repurposed into what they are now: the Compilers. They would serve not just as frontline warriors in 4 armies, but also as specialists in electronic and cyber warfare. With this deadly new tool in their arsenal, the Pfhor would set about conquering yet more of the galaxy, assured now of a new form of dominance in warfare. The Sphit people may well have been broken, especially given the Pfhor's ability to create cybernetic controller units that would dominate them and force them to obey their every directive. But deep within the ancestral memory of the Sphit, the legend of the 11th clan lived on, like kindling, waiting to be lit by a particularly stubborn spark. And so it is that we come to Tau Ceti and the original events that allowed the Marathon to make its mark. During the process of Marathon's original story, Durandal, one of the Marathon's 3 AIs, went rampant. He was the one who lured the Pfhor to Tau Ceti in the first place, but in doing so, he was able to board and take over their ship. To do this, he needed a revolution from within, and the Sphit would be his tools for this. In order to begin this revolution, though, he needed to transport Mjolnir Recon number 54 on board the ship briefly. The Battleroid security officer killed an entity within the Pfhor vessel that was responsible for controlling the compilers aboard the Pfhor vessel and on the Marathon, and down below in the colony. With the destruction of this Pfhor controller, Durandal and the security officer had freed this small group of Sphit. The lost data packets imply to us that the Marathon's original ending is subject to a little change, with Durandal abducting a number of the Marathon's crew aboard the captured Pfhor ship. This included our fateful security officer. Along with his Sphit compilers, Durandal would set course for the Sphit homeworld of Lh'owon, though not before the renaming of the ship that they had captured. Whether it held the name Nar-Allah, meaning freedom and vengeance in the language of the Sphit, or Boomer, is up for some debate. The Sphit needed to be convinced of the alliance that Durandal had struck with them. When they were in service to the Pfhor, they showed their devastating power as they infiltrated the Marathon's computer systems so that they might dismantle its AIs and contain them. However, Durandal was able to learn the legends of the Spit, and whilst he is inevitably self-serving, he was clearly charismatic enough to persuade others of a mutually beneficial cause. And so it was that Durandal stoked the fire within the spirit of the Spit. A fire only possible thanks to the presence of mythology, specifically the mythology of the 11th clan, and their promised return. In this way he formed his alliance with the Spit, and as he headed to Lh'owon on a 17-year voyage, the plan was twofold. For the Spit, the idea was to resummon the 11th clan, and to liberate the entirety of their species from the Pfhor. Durandal, on the other hand, hoped to discover the Yaro technology that had allowed them to fold space, and to escape the end of the universe, the big crunch, as everything pulls together. After all, this was always his goal: to escape. From this point on, timelines start to become very unclear, thanks to the timeline hopping situation of Marathon Infinity. It should therefore be noted that it is not clear how much of what I'm about to tell you has or hasn't happened. If we are in the same timeline shown in Marathon Durandal, then the Pfhor have returned, and our actions allowed the Pfhor all over the galaxy to rise up and overthrow their 4 oppressors. However, if this is the case, then the timeline is filled with inconsistencies compared to what we've experienced as runners down on Tau Ceti 4. A simple example is this. Supposedly, the Pfhor returned to Tau Ceti after Durandal had departed. In doing so, they razed the colony of New Cascadia. And yet we see little evidence of this having happened when we investigate the colony's abandoned sites for ourselves, and have records placed between 20 and 30 years after the attack on the Marathon, which imply that the colony was still holding on. As a result, the question of which timeline we're in has become a very necessary question to ask. So has another, though. Durandal has been our source for most of the information we receive during the original Marathon trilogy, and he is nothing if not manipulative. It is entirely possible that Durandal has lied, especially when presenting us with a series of events that might serve his purposes, but which are not necessarily correct. Durandal also may feel some small, fledgling loyalty to humanity, but this is only insofar as he takes pity on us. He sees us mostly as tools, as nothing more than expendable. Regardless of what timeline we're in, regardless of what has or hasn't happened, I think we can say with some degree of certainty that one thing must be true. Durandal and the Pfhor, in some form, are alive, and somehow they're connected to the floating corpse of Deimos that still hangs in the sky of Tau Ceti 4. They are connected to the Marathon. Putting aside the question of timelines and what has or hasn't happened, we can with certainty say that only a single defining event in the timeline of Marathon has occurred, namely the attack on the UESC Marathon by the Pfhor. This would have led to the involvement of their compiler forces alongside other Pfhor troopers, fighters, enforcers, and their other auxiliaries, like Hulks and simulacrums. According to expanded events in Marathon's timeline, the Pfhor have supposedly been wiped out by human and Pfhor allied forces. But again, the nature of timelines in Marathon makes this an uncertain sequence of events. What we do know, thanks to digging through the remains of Tau Ceti 4, is that the colonists of New Cascadia began to watch their life swiftly unravel as time progressed. In the 20 to 30 years following the events of the Pfhor attack, contagion, crop failure, shared nightmare phenomena, rampancy within colony AIs, and other unexplained happenings indicate that it was not a single thing that felled humanity's first interstellar outpost. In such a calamitous set of circumstances, where the world feels devoid of logic, once again an old habit of the human condition stepped into the gap to make sense of the senseless. And that thing was faith. Some of the colonists of Tau Ceti IV, surrounded by strangeness and uncertainty, looked for answers in what they might consider to be divine. A chorus of voices and a shepherd to lead them found what they might consider those answers to be.
We speak softly of these things and thank eternity.
Eternity, uncaring and pure.
For the harbingers who walk amongst us.
Crimson and cloaked.
Little is known of this shepherd's cult. And yet, even as it is shrouded in mystery, we can discover and discern a few things. We do not know the exact name of this cult-like following that emerged within the colonists. They are as of yet still shrouded in a fair degree of mystery, but we can presume that the one who initially led this cult was one Archite Rill, the so-called First Shepherd. Preaching from a new religious text known as the Architect's Bible, Rill and the others within the cult began to declare new truths of the universe to their followers. Amongst these ideas, there was the notion that the universe was vast and terrible in its power, and that humanity in its limited capacity could not hope to comprehend it. The whispers of this cult imply that they knew of darker things, things that indwelled chaos in the universe from the very beginning.
We speak now of other things. Of the formless devourers made of dream who sleep in burning prisons. The shapeshifters sated by the cascading imaginings of primitive sentience. Omnivores of intellect and the energies of waking life.
Awake and dreaming.
Before time, they wordlessly spoke the universe into existence.
There are those who will understand such descriptions and will recognize what they seemingly speak of. Formless devourers made of dream, sleeping in burning prisons, who spoke the universe into existence. Somehow, these sermons appear to be making reference to that which has devoured entire timelines, to the great enemy that did battle with Yaro, and which was thrown into the heart of Lh'owon's son, to the cosmic chaos of the Worken Carpenter. But much as the shepherds of this cult speak of the universe's crawling chaos that will devour us all, they speak of a means of divine salvation through order and transcendence.
Angels of red, blessed hosts of synthetic evolution, wardens of the purest knowledge, hear us, cartographers of the universal fabric, vivisecting matter and time to catalog reality.
Hear us.
The parallels are clear as day. The cultists within the colony are referencing a creature cloaked in red, and there is only one creature that the colonists of Tau Ceti would have come into contact with that matches such a description: the compilers of the Sphet. The exact nature of the cult's beliefs begins to take on a little more shape with this understanding. The colonists were surrounded by forces that they didn't understand. In particular, they were surrounded by chaos. So they sought a higher power of order to challenge that chaos, and they began to worship it. You can tell thanks to the confiscated idols of strange red-robed figures patched together from bundles of twig and loose fabric. Despite having made such effigies of their devotion, it appears that this colonial folklore was quickly outlawed by higher authorities on Tau Ceti's new Cascadia colony. This cult, therefore, must have been a lesser presence, underground, and yet there is nothing more persistent than a faith pushed to persecution. Such was their devotion that eventually the first shepherd went to join his new gods. He believed that within his body he was a flawed mortal vessel, just as all humans are, incapable of understanding the universe or being more than finite. As the second shepherd to succeed him put it, our shepherd has led the way beyond to the blinding truth of the universe in the guiding light of crimson-cloaked eternity. The cultists did not merely think that the compilers would offer them eternity, they saw them as a path to a form of transcendence should they be worthy. But even as they offered themselves to their crimson angels, as their hearts were weighed by their gods of judgment, they understood that they would all be found wanting to a degree. They believed themselves to be unworthy, and so would submit to the new angels of their faith. It is therefore likely that in this cult's beliefs, be it mistaken or true, anyone who was ascended by the red-cloaked angels was probably killed. It is unclear why these compilers are violent. It may be due to their independence having been more firmly asserted. It may be control for schemes of an unknown nature by Durandal. Or perhaps it is a remaining vestige of control by the Pfhor, which designates all of humanity as a threat. Perhaps it would not matter to such a cult. They would have seen such a moment as a moment of transcendence anyway. It is hard to wrench a confession of ignorance from the dead. This will be the most persistent mystery of the Spht. That, and the question of why they are here again. But whatever the truth of the matter is, they await us in the heavens above, deep in that frigid tomb that brought life to the stars, and which was brought down by the Pfhor. That tomb that still bears the old name of Earth, Marathon. Thank you so much for watching. Before I go, 2 quick things. First of all, I want to make a little correction to the last video. I made reference to the heat death of the universe. In reality, this is not how Marathon's universe is meant to end. As was pointed out correctly in the comments by a few people, it actually ends with the contraction, the big squeeze, an inverse of the Big Bang, the big crunch. The heat death of the universe implies that all of the energy of the universe fades out over time thanks to entropy. The big crunch is an inverse of the Big Bang, implying a expansion and contraction. The two are different, and I wanted to make the distinction here, because it is relatively important for understanding the reality of Durandal's aims. He desires to escape the universe entirely. Secondly, I wanted to give thanks to those who have helped me to uncover some of Marathon's lore that has been a little inaccessible to myself due to timing and team compositions. In particular, I wanted to thank Luminate, EvilFragTrapz, and Separer, all of whom have provided lore archival notes for me from their own codexes. A big thank you to all 3 of you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, and of course, hit subscribe for more content. If you're on mobile, don't forget to swipe right and use the hype feature. In the meantime though, my name is Pfhor. I'll see you Starside.